everybody? Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. Apologies for not being able to go live today. I had my hands full. I've been kind of ripping and running from one holiday to another, work in between. Fun. But here we are with the official December outlook. Again, I keep saying it. It's just this year felt like it went by so fast. I'm just thinking back to when we were in March and looking at that tornado outbreak right around the Pi Day weekend. It seems like that was all yesterday at this point. So much has happened since then, but still, just it's crazy to think that we're here. But this last month, I've been saying it for a while. This had the potential to be a very topsy-turvy kind of month. This is probably going to be the coldest month here, I would say, as of right now. January could have us in for a few surprises as well, but I think this is probably going to be the month where we end up getting the most cold air of the season before we begin to shift into the neutral. And so we've talked about it for a while. We're in what's called a weak La Nina right now, and this is a classic look for a weak La Nina. We have colder temperatures mostly reserved over to the north and northeastern states. Kind of have a little bit of a middle ground going on over towards the northwest, southeast, the deep south, especially over towards Florida. We're expecting above average temperatures, but some colder days will be mixed in the midst of that. So despite seeing the higher probabilities, unless you're over towards far southern Georgia, Florida, and the Gulf Coast, expect some colder mornings to be mixed in, a few colder days. Some days we'll probably even struggle to get up to 60, especially for these areas that are in that lighter shade of orange, heading into the equal chances for above or below average temperatures. Now, I think the biggest topic here, in my personal opinion, would really revolve around the precip outlook, as things look like they're going to be incredibly busy over the deep south. We've had a couple of models picking up on a few storm systems that will be coming through this particular region here over the next week or even 10 days at this point. So it's not all that far-fetched to see this heightened probability of above average precip. We're sitting in the 50 to 60 percentile range for this area right here. It's not a very large area. It's a tiny swath that stretches from south central parts of Louisiana all the way to central Georgia and areas in between, including central parts of Mississippi and Alabama. So along this little stripe here, I guess we could best describe it as we're expecting an increase in a lot of precipitation, a lot of storm systems potentially coming through there. Also over towards the northwest, I'm expecting an increase in activity over here. It's already been pretty busy, and I would expect it to pretty much continue that way. The storm track really favors a lot of activity towards these regions anyhow, so it's not surprising to see this either. It's not too big of a change from what we've seen in the last outlook, or I dare say preview at this point. I figured there was going to be some shifting here, but we'll have to see what happens going forward. Then it's also not surprising to see the above average precip look over towards the northeastern states, especially over towards the mid-Atlantic as well. This does lead me to think there could be potential for maybe a winter storm to sneak through this area as well. We've already been pretty close, and we're maintaining the cold air, and we're expected to at least over the course of these next couple of weeks here. So if a storm were to dip just a little bit further south and bring some cold air with it, could even be looking at the DC area, maybe even Philly potentially getting some snow here. It's going to be a little bit more of a struggle if we're closer towards the coastline. Obviously, it's a big unknown when it comes to these wintry systems in regards to who does or doesn't get snow. It's always a game of miles here, and usually probably about 20 or 30 miles. So it's a hard forecast nonetheless here. But one other thing that I've made note of here, and we talked about it in the winter outlook, is the stratospheric heating. We've seen these incredibly warm air masses that have popped up over here around the Aleutian Islands over here and over towards the Gulf of Alaska. We're going to continue to see those over the course of the next week. This is going to allow more cold air to kind of push in from there. Eventually, these warm air masses are going to move into the lower 48 here, and as a result, we'll start to see a little bit of warming up starting out towards the western states, but eventually this progresses out to the east, kind of helps reinforce that southeast ridge here. It does look like we start to level out, but just when we think we do, I do think this little episode here is going to bring in a little bit more cold air from the north as well, and then by the time we get towards the next frame, you kind of see it a little bit more clearly. So while there are going to be times where things warm back up just ever so slightly, it's going to only be to the extent in which I would say that even if you're in the deep south here, it's going to feel notably different. It's going to be cooler than what we're used to. And it's going to progress all the way through the month, all the way up to New Year's Eve at this point. Then by the time we get into that first week of January, it looks like we start to level out, but it looks like we already have another episode lining up right here. So, like I said, I do think that the pattern that we're seeing now could potentially carry over into January, but we're still such a long ways out. I can't put a whole lot of merit into it, but this is probably the most consistent pattern that I've seen since summertime, truthfully. And even as we go into the middle part of January, we still see more signals for even more stratospheric heating going forward. Now, looking at how the jet stream kind of pans out here, this is what we're looking at currently as of right now. You can see how the cold air has even worked its way into the deep south here. By the time we get into next week, that's that warm air mass that we were talking about as we get the 2 weeks out. And then as we go further along, we'll start to see the cold air come back into play once again. Now, if things were to warm up over here, it could lead to an interesting signal maybe for severe weather over towards the Gulf states. But I expect this to be a predominantly winter based pattern, a lot more potential for winter storms at this point in time here. If we go even further along here, you can kind of see how that cold air is kind of panning out ahead of it. I think this will also be a pretty busy month, particularly for the Great Lakes here and maybe the Ohio Valley, Midwest as well. But a lot of these storm systems, based off the trends that we see here, they're going to probably be quick movers. I don't see any slow stalling, almost storm systems coming through for either one of these regions going forward here. Another area that could be a sleeper also in regards to winter weather might more or less be the northeast here, particularly towards the Adirondack and Poconos as well. Of course, we already talked about the Great Lakes being a point of interest, but sometimes this area right here often will end up being overlooked. And based off the temperature maps that I've seen here, it kind of correlates well with it as well, especially as we go further along here. This is probably going to be the warmest part of the month as we get towards the 15th. Right here towards the central part of the U.S. is where I've seen the most significant numbers based off model data here. We could be about 20 to 30 degrees above average here. But you have to keep in mind is that there have been times where I've seen temperatures at about 10 degrees over in areas like Nebraska during this time of year as well. So, considering that, you can't rule out the potential for winter weather over here, even despite seeing this impressive signal nonetheless. And then by the time we head into the following week, right around or just before the Christmas holiday, you can see that warm air retreating back to the south here. And then we start to see cold air reintroduce itself by the time we get to just before New Year's Eve. So if we combine all of that data with the temperatures with the precip here, what you'll notice is, obviously, here's our signal for the deep south. Today's the 2nd. We're looking at the 9th right here. Still a pretty robust signal for precip here. Things do look like they kind of level off towards the middle part of the month. Then we start to see a little bit of a slight increase over here towards the Gulf states, the Ozarks, and maybe even towards the Great Lakes. Then the signal comes back over towards the eastern half of the country, right around New Year's Eve time frame. Then our first week into January, we're kind of calming back down once more. I think it's by this point we might be starting to sneak into that neutral Enzo phase where things are going to be even harder to predict. But in either case here, the first half of this month looks like it's going to be exceptionally active. And then as we get towards the second half, I would expect things to kind of calm down and maybe a pretty active end to the month as well. Now, depending on how strong those warm air masses get, that could change things as well. So there's a lot of variability in regards to the outlook itself here. If I were to go ahead and take a look at things with the overall jet stream, since we're within the month now, we can actually take a look at what it could be like every day for the month here. Now, keep in mind, this is the only model that goes out this far in the range, and I don't even like looking at 10 days, honestly, with just one model, let alone two. So take all of this with a grain of salt here. You can see that we have multiple troughs again coming through by the time we get towards the 9th. And it really isn't going to be until we get towards the 11th or 12th where things start to calm down. We start to see some ridging coming back into play. But even then, as I said before, this is a pattern that looks like it really favors the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes in regards to winter weather. So expect to see more snowfall within that time frame here. At this point, we're still within GFS and the Euros range. It's once we get a little bit further beyond that is when things start to get a little bit more complicated. We start to see more ridging beginning to occur over here, and also the warm air starting to take over. Cold air retreats back to the north, and then as time goes on, a new trough comes in around the 16th, and things begin to change once again. I think it will be within this time frame here where maybe we would have an opportunity for severe weather if conditions continue to trend in this direction and continue to become more favorable. Now, the thing with this is, obviously, we're looking at 400 hours out. We're not in range of any other model data. So really, at this point, we're looking for more so a trend than even a signal at this point. You can see this right here. This is our southeast ridge, and this is what's going to help keep us warm here. We look notably warmer based off of the contour lines here and the pressure gradients that I'm seeing. We're seeing the numbers getting into the 570s and 580s here. Put it in perspective for you, a little further up to the north is the 540 line. That's where you see the jet stream being at its strongest here. And this is where things kind of get active. Once you get into the 570s and 580s, we're usually getting into the 60 to 70 degree range here in regards to our temperatures. So by looking at that, I can already tell the deep south looks like it's going to be pretty warm. Again, this kind of goes perfectly along with the outlook map, with the northern states staying a little bit cooler than average here. Now, as we go further along, as we get towards Christmas and beyond here, you can see that we still have some troughing, but for the most part, we're kind of dominated by warm air. And this continues to be a trend all the way up until that 30th time frame where we see a really large trough coming into play, maybe to end out the month. Now, again, as I've mentioned before, and I'll keep saying it here, looking this far out in advance is almost a pitfall in a way. But since we're doing the monthly outlook, it's the only time I make an exception for it. Any other time, I don't even use this model. But based off the trending I've seen, combining that along with the model data I see available, it does look like that, at least in the back half of the month, I would say anywhere from the Ozarks could be a point of interest for severe weather. A lot more snow is likely for the Midwest, but especially over towards the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley. Towards the Northwest, wouldn't be surprised to see more snow. That's been the trend so far, and with the consistency we've seen, I would expect that to continue through the first half of the month. The second half looks a little bit more fuzzy, especially as we get towards the middle part of the month, because a big ridge is going to go through here first before working its way out to the east. So lastly here, we're also going to go ahead and take a quick look at the precip map here. Just hoping that my loop would work. So again, this is the deep south. Now, one thing I am going to do is I'm going to freeze that frame real quick and show you this little feature right here. This could be a little bit of a wild card as we get into the start of next week. I don't expect this to be a big time snowstorm or anything like that, but this pushes a little bit further to the south, kind of like how this last system did, and then potentially becomes a nor'easter here. This is within the GFS and Euro range, so we will be talking about that within the next day or two. But from what I've seen here, it could be a point of interest maybe for Kentucky, Tennessee, maybe even North Carolina and Virginia as well. As far as Georgia, maybe even over towards Alabama and Mississippi, there is a brief chance we could get some flurries out of this. If this thing were to deepen further, because this looks like the origin of this system is a clipper from Alberta, if this ends up deepening by some chance, then maybe, just maybe, you might see a dusting of snow out of this. Obviously, like I said, at this range, 156 hours out, a lot can happen here. And not all models are really picking up on this. Of course, this model is not one of my favorites to look at for overall forecasting, so I'll have to be watchful of that. Another interesting scenario, again, this is a CFS run. I haven't seen anything like this on GFS and Euro runs yet, but this will be a trend that I'll be keeping an eye out for. Does look like there could be a chance we get a winter event over here towards the deep south. Maybe some cold air damming could lead to some mixed precipitation, maybe even ice. We'll have to keep an extra close eye out for that. And then as we go even further along, we'll go back to putting this in a loop here. You can see how the winter weather is kind of more northeast and Great Lake oriented based off the pattern here. A lot more rain off to the south to really close out the month. Like I said, there could be a chance for some severe weather mixed in. I would really lean towards more of the Gulf states than I would anywhere else in regards to potential for a more notable event. But again, it's just something we'll have to keep a close eye on going forward. But with that in mind, I appreciate you all being here. These videos are getting longer, and I apologize for that. But whenever you have to add winter weather into the equation, along with the lingering severe potential, that tends to happen. But I appreciate you guys' patience, especially if you made it to the end. Either way, no matter how you look at it, I wanted to say thank you. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, urge you to share the channel. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Everyone take care and have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.